Hello jelly beans! I'm finally going to be painting with the jelly gouache again. Today I'm going to walk you through the entire process of painting this portrait using a photo reference that I got from a royalty-free website. I'm going to have the photo reference up on the screen next to my painting the entire time so that you can follow along with me. I'll also have a link to the photo in the description as well. So I encourage you to bust out your art supplies and paint along with me. And just as a disclaimer, this piece took roughly about 3 hours, so feel free to pause or rewind the video whenever you need to. And of course, feel free to use whatever supplies you'd like, but the techniques I'll be using will mainly pertain to gouache. Okay, so first we're gonna start out by doing the sketch, and as usual, I'm going to be using my favorite Kohl Erase color pencil to sketch. So when I'm doing a portrait, I usually start out with a light kind of sphere, and then usually I'll do kind of the axis lines, so the one going up and down and then the one going across, and this represents the center of the face, and then this is here going to be where we're mapping out where the eyes are going to go. And then from there, I kind of just roughly draw in the jawline. Always really nervous, and I think that's why I don't film my sketching process quite as often either. But I'm going to try my best. So now I'm doing the nose. I think lately I've been doing the nose first in terms of the features, because I find it's you know, the center of the face, and so I think it helps map out. If I put in the nose first, then I can kind of figure out where the rest of the features are going to go based on that. Something that you'll realize about my sketching process is I put in all these guidelines and end up pretty much disregarding them pretty quickly, as well as I do a lot of erasing, and I usually use a kneadable eraser. Okay, so usually from here, sometimes I'll do the eyes, sometimes I'll do the mouth. Today I'm feeling the mouth first. So from here, I usually start mapping out where in this photo that we're using here, the mouth is slightly parted. So we're drawing the inside of the mouth, I guess is what we would call it. I don't really explaining. And then after I've drawn the inside of the mouth, I like to put emphasis on the corners of the mouth there. And then we'll do the upper lip and the bottom lip. I feel like explaining my sketching process is like that meme of the owl. Draw some circles and then draw the rest of the owl. I think so I'm kind of just looking here, and it looks like we're kind of getting off center there. So if I line that up there, so what we're gonna do is want the Cupid's bow to match up with the nose here. And then, so how I usually go about it is the inner corner of the eyes roughly line up with the outside of the nostril, and start out by drawing the top of the eyelid, or top of the eye, I should say, not the eyelid. The eyelid's gonna end up being up here. But something that I find helps in getting not symmetry, but getting the eyes up to par with each other, I guess, is working on both at the same time, rather than drawing one and then moving from start to finish and then moving on to the other one from start to finish. I go back and forth so that they are at the same kind of level of completion. So yeah, I did the bottom lash line here, and then the pupils, no, irises, anatomy. All right, and then from here, we're gonna put in the eyelids. From here, we're going to draw in her eyebrows. She's got very expressive eyebrows in this photograph, which I think was probably what drew me to this photo. Another reason why I picked this photograph as well is because there's a very clear light source, which makes for more defined shadows, which will make it a lot easier for us to paint later. Because I know a lot of you guys have asked about, you know, having troubles with knowing where to put shadows and stuff. And as always, I always say to use reference photos. And another added element is picking reference photos that have clear shadows, because sometimes people's photographs will have very, very soft lighting or multiple light sources, which sometimes makes it difficult to really understand the shadows in place. So that might be something to keep in mind when you are looking at reference photos. So now I'm just kind of putting in defining this face shape. And what I always end up doing is I always end up drawing the features too big for the face, so I always end up having to enlarge the rest of the face, which is why it's important to go in with a fairly light hand, especially in those kind of early guideline stages. And I say guidelines in quotations because, as you can see, I completely erased the original guidelines that we had previously. So now I'm putting in the neck here. And something that I want to note as well is even though we are using a photo reference here, I'm not typically going for, whenever I'm doing portraits at this point in my artistic career, I guess you could call it, I'm never usually going for exact likeness, nor am I going for perfect realism. I like using photo references just to have a starting point, and from there I often will simplify or stylize or exaggerate certain features, because that's just the way that I like to make my work, is I prefer to stylize my portraits. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind, I guess, going forward with this entire process, is the final result of what we're doing, of what I'm doing here, is not going to be an exact replica of the photograph. That's never really my intention. For me, it's more about having the photograph as a starting point. And then from there, I like to, you know, use my creativity to kind of transform the piece into something more unique to me. And of course, I had to pick a reference photo with a hand, which, as it goes, hands are definitely something that I have difficulties with, but it's good to continue to practice rather than avoid it. And something that is good to, or helps, I think, with drawing, is trying to break up the thing that you're drawing into shapes, and then narrowing it down from there. The sketching process is going relatively smoother than I thought it would. Sometimes I end up having to redraw the nose or the mouth like 1,000 times. Okay, now for the hair. So she's got her hair really, really tightly combed back, and she's got a cute poof on the top of her head. All right, so another reason why sketching while filming is difficult is I have to be further back from the piece so that my head is not in the way of the camera. And then I have a microphone in front of me as well, so I have to be kind of further away from it, and that's so the perspective of the illustration is slightly skewed. And so I just took a photograph of it and realized everything is kind of squished because of the angle that I'm seeing this at. So we have to, her face looked a little bit squished. I'm going to extend her face slightly. I'm still seeing it at the same angle as I was before, so I'm just sort of eyeballing it from photo I took on my iPad. And so basically I'm just going to try and mimic what we just did, slightly lower. And this is part of the reason why sketching digitally is so much easier because in digital form I could have just, you know, lassoed or grabbed, selected that area and just dragged it down. But the fun part of doing this traditionally is you manually have to do it all over again. Okay, so I totally forgot to hit record, of course, but basically what I did is I outlined everything with my favorite Faber-Castell Polychromos color pencil. Basically, it's an oil-based color pencil, and so that way it resists water when we start painting on it, and it also is of course, a little bit darker so that the sketch is a little bit more visible when we start painting. But I do recommend taking a photograph of your sketch before you start painting as well, because we will inevitably start covering up the sketch lines with the paint since it's opaque. Alright, so I've got my jelly gouaches open. Something to note, they have started to dry out a little bit, but it's not a big deal because they are reactivatable. I have this little spout thingy that I just fill with water and then I just drop it into the paints. I get asked about brushes constantly, and honestly, synthetic paintbrushes will do just fine for gouache. I use these for gouache and I use them for watercolors, so yes. So for her skin tone, I'm going to mix up the lighter brown in this gouache set. I don't know what any of these colors are, I apologize. But I'm using the kind of lighter brown. I'm using lots of water for this first layer, almost like watercolors basically. And like I mentioned earlier, I do go for kind of more exaggerated colors, I'm not going for perfect accuracy. And the in the photograph, we've got a very strong light source coming from the kind of above and the left side. So I am going to try and kind of preserve those highlights for the most part. Well, not preserve, but be mindful of them, I guess, is maybe the better way of phrasing it. And so right now I'm just sort of putting in this very, very warm red color in the warmest parts that I'm seeing here. And when I use gouache, I like to use very, very thin layers for the first stages, and then we thicken the paint and use less water in the mixtures as we continue on. Because if you use really thin layers on top of thick paint, the water will reactivate the paint underneath. As well, if you go to thick, if you have too much thick layers just in general, the paint can crack. So that is something you have to be careful of as well. And so that's why we're going in with very thin, watered down layers. And this helps just establish the colors, the shadows, and just get some paint down. Because it can be very nerve-wracking starting a piece. And I feel like that often is half the battle, is just starting. Okay, so I have used a hairdryer. What happened here? I've used a hairdryer, blow dryer to completely dry this layer since we used a lot of water. And so now we can move on to the next layer. Mix up a little bit of a kind of highlight color as well, since we will start covering up all of the paper. Because right now that's what we've been relying on the white of the paper to kind of act as a highlight, but now we're going to start blocking that in. So I mixed some yellow ochre with some of the warm brown that we had used there. So it creates this nice like caramel color. So usually I start out with the face, but I might actually go with the body, shoulders area first. Just kind of get a feel for these colors that I've mixed. And at this point, don't worry about it being perfectly blended or super smooth or whatever. These kind of still early stages of the painting, it's more about just sort of blocking in some colors and values. And then from there we can, as we keep layering, we can refine the blending elements. And to be honest, I'm finding myself trying not to be too obsessive about everything needing to be perfectly smooth or perfectly blended. There is kind of a beauty and something nice about being able to see some of the brush strokes and keeping things a little bit looser sometimes. Yeah, in the photograph, the kind of highlights of her skin are actually definitely much cooler than what I'm currently painting. But I like painting really, really warm skin tones. And my kind of intention, I'm thinking, with this portrait is I want her skin to be really, really warm, and then I'm hoping to do like a kind of teal or blue background. And yeah, now we're definitely getting into the we're going to be very lost together at this point. I feel like if you've attended, if you've come to any of my live streams on Instagram, and you've seen any of my gouache ones, you'll know that I go through kind of a whole cycle of emotions during my gouache painting process. Basically, I mean, and I expressed this actually in my jelly gouache video as well, is that a good portion of the process is just me panicking. Because even though I know that, especially painting with gouache, there's a lot of ugly stages that your painting will go through, it still doesn't stop me from feeling a bit discouraged, and when, you know, the painting looks haggard. But you just have to keep at it and hope for the best. something, yes, so the paint that was currently on my paintbrush, fairly warm, so I'll use that on her nose and her chin. And then yeah, pretty much from here, we're just gonna keep layering and blocking out the shadows and highlights. But I am finding it's starting to look kind of almost green against this like very orange red based mid-tone that I've got going on here. So I might actually start using a kind of medium yellow instead of the ochre. I think the ochre is what's making it a bit too kind of grayed out and ashy in comparison to the very red based mid-tones that we've got going on here. So more of like a sun, kind of the similar color to the washi tape that I've got here. And so from here, now I'm just like, now I'm in panic mode. Now I'm like, ooh, this is looking rough. Something that I've been doing more of with gouache is kind of a hatching kind of look. So I'm just sort of like, yeah, doing kind of a hatching with lines and then, you know, placing colors next to them. Creates kind of a fun light texture. And basically from here you'll see me using all three roughly of the different kind of paint mixtures that I've made and pushing and pulling the values and using the kind of hatching shading technique to kind of blend the colors together. This is definitely the point where my brain just sort of turns off and I'm just really in the zone in the painting process. So hopefully seeing the visual of it helps you guys, but I don't really know what else to say in terms of explaining it. I do find that you can use a little bit of water on a clean brush to blend very softly if you touch the surface really, really lightly. But for the most part, how I'm able to transition from color to color is by the kind of cross-hatching motion, as well as just mixing lots of different shades between the different values. Alright, so I mixed up some more paint here so that we can, I'm going to leave the skin on the face alone for a bit, let it dry and kind of come back to it. So I got to start painting the hand and the other shoulder here. So I'm just going to show you my palette here really quick. So basically this side is a mixture of like a deep yellow with some white. This middle section is the burnt sienna with the yellow, and then this is the burnt sienna here, and then this mixture here is a little bit of the red orange with the burnt sienna. So I find that having the colors pre-mixed and ready to go makes the actual painting process a little bit easier because you're able to kind of scoop the paints back and forth, and that's how I'm able to do a little bit of the blending, is because the colors are ready, and inevitably I end up, you know, mixing the colors kind of in between these sections as well to get as many transitional shades as possible. With my first jelly gouache painting and video, I gave the portrait some kind of graphic little teardrops, and I was debating on doing the same for this portrait because I always love doing kind of series or sets of illustrations so that they have kind of a matching sister, if you will. But I think that we could all use some positivity right now rather than tears. So I think instead I might do, just so that it still feels like it matches or goes with the other portrait, but I think I might end up doing some stars instead around the eyes to give it kind of a more, kind of a celestial vibe. I think that will be cute. Or maybe even like little star and moon freckles, maybe. That'd be cute too. We'll see. We shall see as we go. And yeah, so now we're at the, definitely trying to use as little water, but just enough to allow the paint to flow across the page. And thankfully, I think we're at the point in the painting where it doesn't look terrible anymore. It's, you know, it's starting to come together. Okay, as promised, let's do some of her makeup now. So using the burnt sienna again, and this kind of the red orange color we were using for the skin also. Cleaning off my brush. So now the brush has no paint on it. It's just a little bit damp. gonna use just the damp brush to blend in to create a lighter shade there. Now I think we can move on to the deepest, darkest shadows. So I think I'm going to use some purple. And yeah, so we're just gonna add this in for some of the more dramatic shadows. And this helps give it some more interest and more contrast. But admittedly, I think it's actually maybe a little bit cooler than I wanted it to be. So I'm mixing it up with the rest of that red that was on the palette. And I'm going over it again. Let's see. This actually, yeah, I think this might be a better color. That way it's not so stark. Now, something that I think is missing is just that extra bit of kind of punchy warmth. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually take more of that red-orange color and kind of disperse it into the piece. I find that at this point, when the majority of like the face and the skin has been painted in, I can kind of relax a little bit, because I find that's the most difficult part, and for me, like the part that matters the most. At this point now, it's just like, yeah, putting in the hair, clothes, background, and then like all the line art. I guess the line art does come with a little bit of pressure as well, because you did all that work on rendering the face, and the last thing you want to do is ruin it with, poor eyeliner or something. By the way, still using the exact same paintbrush. Like, this entire painting process thus far has been using a single paintbrush. We will be using the others in a moment for the more detailed parts of the piece. Now, as this is filling up more of the frame, I do think that it's a bit saturated, a little bit too saturated. Like I feel like it's competing with the portrait. And this is where my indecisiveness really comes in. But I will say this color is definitely an improvement from the light blue. Now it actually sits in the background as opposed to competing with the portrait. Actually, you know what? Now that it's all in, I'm into it, right? Look at the difference. Yeah. You know what? I'm into it. All right. I'm kind of rethinking the stars that I was thinking of putting in. Now I think I kind of want to do like daisies or something. I feel like this is giving me a much kind of more nature-y vibe than celestial. And if you're having trouble with getting clean lines, definitely just continue to add a little bit more water to your paint mixture, and that will allow the paint to flow and glide a lot better. I think a lot of people think that the key to this clean kind of line work is the brush, but part of it is the consistency of your paint as well. And something that I do when I'm trying to make sure I keep that sharp point is I actually kind of twirl my paintbrush in the paint to help enforce that point. Something that I've been doing lately that has been kind of fun is adding kind of a blue around the eye, around the pupils. It's something that I saw Happy D Artist do in one of her paintings, and I just thought it was so cool. It reminds me of when you look really, really close at someone wearing contacts, you can kind of see that like blue ring around their pupils where the contacts are. Yeah, so that's what it kind of reminds me of. I'm not sure where Happy D Artist got the idea from. So I'm using my acrylic paint marker here for the middles of the daisies. Okay, so my phone died and I had to let that charge before I continued on, but I only did a teeny little bit off camera, so I believe I kind of did a little bit more shadow on the nose here, and then I did add just a little bit, just kind of refined some of these little edges here, but didn't do too much off camera. All right. So now, as I was saying, instead of using the paint marker for the petals on the little daisies, I'm actually going to use this poster paint here. And by the way, guys, you can definitely just use whatever white gouache that you have. Poster paint basically is gouache, and the reason why I chose to use this one as opposed to the one that's already in my palette is the white in my jelly gouache palette is pretty contaminated from mixing it constantly with other colors, so this was just easier since this white has been untouched. White highlights in her eyes. It's always satisfying and brings the portrait to life. And I always love putting in highlights right at the inner corner, the eyes, and I do a speckling motion to kind of mimic glitter almost, because as some of you might know, I love makeup, and it kind of reminds me of when you put highlight, like actual makeup highlighter on your face. I might, yeah, do it on the eyes too. The speckling also kind of mimics like the pores on your skin as well. And that is the finished piece. This video definitely proved to be a bit of a challenge to film and edit, since I had to talk while painting and try to remember every little detail of this process. So I hope that this was helpful for you guys. I hope you have a fantastic day or evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.